Joining us now from Oakland University is Michael Greiner, Assistant Professor of Management in their School of Business Administration, for our weekly Market Talk. Michael, thanks for being with us today.
Great to be back, Tyler. Hope you're managing to stay warm out there.
Trying to stay warm out there and trying to stay warm here in the studio, too. We got a door that leads right outside from here. Luckily, it's well sealed up and soundproof. That helps also to keep the studio nice and toasty during the day. What isn't so cold anymore seems to be inflation, with the Federal Reserve this week raising interest rates again, still trying to fight inflation, but not quite as severely as they had risen rates the past several times. Tell us about that, Michael.
Yeah, it's interesting what they did this time is they decided that they were going to increase interest rates by 1/4 percentage point, which is quite a decline from what we've been seeing in the past. I mean, after all, last month, we were excited when they only increased it by about 1/2 percentage point. That was a decline from what we'd had the previous 4 meetings, which was a 0.75% increase. So they've been increasing it at a historically fast rate, and to see it down at the 1/4 percentage point increase is actually quite a relief. And the markets, frankly, responded very favorably to that. You've seen actually thus far this year, the markets have been having a historic year. So we'll see how much that continues going forward. But so far, they're very optimistic, given the prospect that these rate increases should be slowing down. Because, of course, what the goal of these rate increases is to slow down the economy. Part of the reason that we had inflation is that we came back so quickly from the COVID recession that basically our whole economy got thrown into chaos. Everything stopped all of a sudden, and then you had to kind of accelerate things back up to 100 miles per hour very quickly. And that's kind of then what caused this increase in inflation. So since then, the Fed's been kind of trying to tap the brakes a little bit. And certainly with their 0.75% increases, it's more than tapping the brakes. It's actually slamming pretty hard on the brakes. But even with that, they haven't really been able to do that much to slow the economy. I mean, real estate has been dramatically impacted, which makes sense because so much of that is driven by interest rates on mortgages, which go up when the Fed increases their interest rates. So you can see where people aren't able to afford to buy as much house as they would have been able to, or businesses might not be able to invest in the kind of real estate that they might have been able to because mortgage rates have gone up so much. But when you look at the rest of the economy, it's doing pretty well. And in fact, we just received a surprisingly good jobs report this morning, which said that we actually added 517,000 more jobs to the economy, and the unemployment rate decreased again, this time to 3.4%, which I think is the lowest rate we've seen since 1969. So the job market seems to be booming, and we also got news that that there are more job openings than there are people working by a larger margin than we've seen in some time as well. So it seems like, wow, things are going great on the jobs market. That seems like a good thing. The problem is, though, that creates pressure for wages to go up. At least that's the theory. I'll get to that in a minute. And as such, then, that kind of translates into higher costs for people, especially when you start looking at things like the service industries, like restaurants and that type of thing, where such a high percentage of their cost is labor. So if labor costs go up, then obviously they have higher costs and they pass it on to the consumers. So the Fed's been very concerned about the tight labor market, and that's been a big thing that they've been watching as they've been choosing to increase interest rates. But then in addition to all this news about this white-hot labor market, we also got news last week that wage increases have slowed, which again seems kind of counterintuitive. You think if you've got a white-hot labor market, that wages will be increasing faster. So it seems like, again, you've got some contradictory information here. And that's, I think, what this latest rate increase is really all about, which is that the Fed, like everybody else who's watching it, whether you're an economist or whether you're just a person, trying to manage your own budget, we're all confused about what's happening right now. We went through this huge disruption with COVID. We went through this massively fast bounce back of the economy. Inflation that we hadn't seen in 40 years. And the question is, what's next? How's the economy going to adjust to all this? And we don't really know because we're kind of in brand new territory here. So on the one hand, the Fed is concerned. They don't want to get caught essentially with their pants down the way they were with inflation before. So they're trying to increase a little bit, and they signal to the markets, hey, we're still increasing. We're not stopping these increases. So that's essentially the message that Fed Chairman Jerome Powell sent. But at the same time, they want to kind of slow down these increases so they can kind of wait and see what happens, because they know that the rate increases they've been making have been having an impact. I mean, inflation is definitely slowing. There's no doubt about that. The question is, though, how much it's slowing, if it's really going to permanently slow, or if this is just kind of a blip, another blip on the screen. To kind of take all this in right now, the Fed thinks we need to kind of just take our time, look at what's happened, let the rate increases that they've already done kind of sink in and impact the economy, and then see how it's going to all work out. Because one thing they don't want to do is they don't want to increase interest rates so fast that it throws the economy into an unnecessary recession. People are concerned about that. At the same time, they don't want to increase interest rates so slowly or decrease them where suddenly you see inflation pop up again. So they're kind of trying to walk this middle course here where they're saying, well, we're going to increase it a little, but not too much, kind of like with the three bears and Goldilocks. And so they're trying to find that Goldilocks zone of how much can we increase it without throwing the economy into recession while still getting the impact that we want on inflation. And given the conflicting data that we keep getting, this has really been a challenging effort for the Fed right now.
And it's challenging for a lot of people, too, because regular average people here in the U.S. really don't know what to think with the economy, because inflation's still very much been a factor across the markets, especially when it comes to their prices at the gas pump, when it comes to their prices at the grocery store, and for other necessities. Housing, another thing that you mentioned, still having a heavy impact from inflation. But at the same time, jobs are plentifully available, wages have been increasing, and so there's rationale that usually leads to consumers being really happy. And then there's also rationale that leads to them being really concerned about the economy. And so with all of that coupling together, consumer confidence has actually been pretty low lately, surprisingly.
Yeah, it's amazing, and that had been one of the bright spots of the economy during the last year when we were dealing with inflation, where consumers kept spending. And so people thought, oh, the consumer confidence is high, then they're going to keep spending, and that's going to essentially sustain the economy despite the fact that we're having this inflation issue. Well, we saw that slow down a little bit in December. But what's more is that they'll do these surveys of consumer confidence. There are a couple of organizations that do that. One is the University of Michigan, and one is the Consumer Confidence Board. And both of them, their latest surveys have been showing that consumers are generally very negative about the state of the economy, especially when they're looking forwards, that they believe that the American economy is going into recession. They believe that that jobs are going to be drying up. They believe that that inflation hasn't been conquered. People are incredibly negative about the economy right now. But yet, what's interesting about that is that many of these surveys will ask about how you feel about your personal circumstances versus how you feel about the economy overall. And generally what we're seeing is people generally are feeling pretty good about their own personal circumstances, which just shows this disconnect and this confusing data that we're getting right now. Because I think what people have to remember is that we are the economy. When we are spending money, that's essentially putting money back into the economy that then ends up circulating and benefiting other people within the economy. If we pull back on our spending, then that means less money is available and the economy has less activity. So the fact that we're all feeling pretty good about our own economic circumstances should translate into us feeling pretty good about the economy overall. But it's not. And in fact, the most recent survey by the Consumer Confidence Board says that in essence, we expect that there's going to be a recession over the next year, which again is also divergent from what we're seeing from some of the experts at the International Monetary Fund. The IMF last week said that they actually upgraded their estimates for the global economy, thinking that actually the global economy is doing pretty well. They expect the United States to keep growing. They think Europe might avoid the worst of the recession that they were expecting. They think China is going to come back into its growth phase. And so they're looking at a more positive rating of the economy. So that's where we're into this weird era where just nobody knows what to think about what's going on.
We're joined by Michael Greiner on today's edition of the Megacast, Assistant Professor of Management with Oakland University's School of Business Administration. More information on Oakland University programs can be found on their website at oakland.edu. And Michael, another thing that's certainly going to have an impact on the economy and on future projections too is the response from the federal government on COVID-19. This week, the president and the Biden administration ended the national health emergency surrounding COVID-19. And so that certainly, COVID has had a big impact on the economy over the last several years. It's changed our economy in a number of ways and certainly put our economy in a position to where many of the problems that we are having and many of the benefits that we're also having were catalyzed by that crisis. So how does the ending of the national health emergency from the Biden administration, from the president's administration, impact both our market now and where it may be going in the near future?
Yeah, this is kind of one of those stories that it kind of comes in with a bang and leaves with a whimper. I mean, many people might remember a few months ago when President Biden was captured saying that he believed that the pandemic was over. And that was interpreted various ways by various people, depending upon their political persuasion, of course. But the bottom line is, I think that's how most Americans are feeling right now. We don't see the kind of masking that we'd seen in the past for the most part. Most people feel pretty comfortable going out without masks on, and most people have at least had some of the vaccinations. And as a result of that, most of the population right now has some immunity that they've developed, either through vaccinations or through actually having COVID to the disease. Now, the truth of the matter is we still are having a large number of people dying per week. I think last figure I saw was about 1,000 people a week dying across the country, which is a lot. It sounds like a lot. It's too many. And we still have not enough people who have received the most recent vaccination, the bivalent injection, which is the most effective of all of them. And we also aren't seeing enough usage of the medicine Paxlovid, which really has a great impact on improving outcomes for people who've gotten COVID. But for the most part, things have pretty much gone back to normal. And even in China, where they had these terrible lockdowns there, and then all of a sudden they said, okay, now suddenly the economy's open, and they had really this huge surge of COVID. Well, now that surge seems to be dying off. And similarly, here in the United States, people were expecting a surge this winter, and that really didn't seem to happen. So I think at this point, we're about ready to move COVID into kind of more of those kind of chronic things that you're aware of that happen every year, and people just need to kind of be protecting themselves from things more like influenza, which people forget. I mean, every year, the flu, just the regular flu, kills anywhere from 30 to 100,000 people a year. So getting your flu shot is important. And I think just as important going forward, getting your COVID vaccination every year is going to be important. And I think that's kind of where this is moving. Now, many of the benefits that came from the emergency declaration at this point, frankly, aren't huge issues because, again, I think the population as a whole have already kind of moved on. Most of the economy as a whole has pretty much already moved on from it. Really, it's only a few minor things right now. One of the things that had been affected by the emergency declaration was, of course, the requirement to pay back on student loans. A lot of people were required to do that. And then there was relief from that as a result of the COVID emergency. Well, as a result of the pending litigation over whether certain amounts of the student loans can be forgiven by the president, that's pending, I think, until well into the summer at this point. So we'll see what happens with that. that isn't going to be impacted by the end of the emergency declaration. So really, the only big issues are the funding that there is for the vaccine, which of course has been free for everybody up until now. Well, now that's not going to be the case necessarily. Same thing for Paxlovid, the medicine for treating the vaccine. So we'll see what happens with that. There also could be some impact on Medicaid eligibility in some states, but again, the Fed is trying to encourage states to pick up as many people as possible on that, so there's as little disruption as possible. But, again, this is something where I think pretty much everybody's already moved on, so I think the president is just kind of implementing where the country already is at this point.
Well, Michael, we appreciate your insight on the developments in our economy over the last week or so, and of course, I look forward to having you join us again next week, Friday, for another one of our market talks.
Sounds great, Tyler. Try to stay warm out there.